The Call of Duty franchise is one with a lot of thoughts and feelings in the air. Lots of people resent it and lots of people love it. I am someone in the latter. But it's also a franchise that has its share of criticisms, its rotten apples, so to speak. I don't like every game, and the ones that I don't like, I'll never talk about them. But the ones I do, well, you'll most certainly be hearing them at certain points. A while back, I had reviewed the first Call of Duty, the game that basically started the whole thing. But Call of Duty was very different back then. They had set themselves within the world of World War II, playing as either the Americans, the Brits, or the Soviets fighting the Germans. It was a far cry from the Call of Duty that we know today, where they had more of an old school approach to its gameplay. The first 3 games would improve graphically with each installment, alongside the gameplay that would be polished with each one. It was a fairly popular series then, but not on the same level as the Halo games were at the time where it dominated the console shooter scene. But that would change completely in 2007, one of the best years of gaming in history. We would get the definitive conclusion to one of the best trilogies of all time. We would get the Orange Box, which had Team Fortress 2, Portal, Half-Life 2, Episode 1 and 2, games that simply refused to die, and for good reason. The game that would break every PC on the market. We would get a metric ton of other fantastic games like World in Conflict, Command & Conquer 3, Mass Effect, Bioshock, Skate, Stalker, Unreal Tournament 3, and Supreme Commander, and so much more. It was a truly magical year. A year where one game would change the face of the mainstream shooter market forever from that point on. Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. Infinity Ward wanted to depart from the World War II phase of classic COD and to try something different in the series that hadn't been seen before, where it would take the gameplay from Call of Duty 3 and polish it even more to the modern standards of 2007. In a modern day setting with a complete change in both the way the single player and the multiplayer were structured. For the very first time, Halo would have a legitimate competitor for the throne. And it was a game that had its own playstyle that was unique from a lot of other ones. Most of the console shooters after 2001 would follow the template of Halo Combat Evolved, because that was the game that set the gold standard at the time on how to make a console shooter. As a result, we would get a ton of Halo killers that would be released during the 6th gen cycle. Call of Duty 4 had exploded in popularity, and had set a new standard on how to make a shooter that was not only more fast-paced, but also in a setting that was more relatable. The PS3 crowd didn't really have a solid selection of shooters aside from Resistance Fall of Man, an underrated shooter with a good story and an interesting setting. But Halo would now have to contend with a shooter that was available on both the PS3 and the 360. And while Halo 3 was still largely popular on the 360 even after COD 4's release, COD 4 had marked the beginning of the end of Halo's reign in the console shooter scene. Call of Duty 4 was a fantastic package in both single player and the multiplayer. Different crowds of people would find a place within the game, and it was something that was made for everyone. Not just hardcore gamers or people that enjoy Zachtronics games, but people who wanted something that was simple but fun to play. And Call of Duty 4 had provided that with flying colors. Looking back at the game retrospectively, it was something I had a lot of memories with. I never had a 360 during its launch, but my brother would end up playing it and loving it almost like everyone else at the time. I had managed to get the game on PC though, and was able to get into its multiplayer that way, even with the live multiplayer service known as Xfire, which was a game chat system that gamers could use as well as fighting matches through servers. It was also a streaming platform that predated Twitch, but that was before Twitch blew up and had made streaming a way to actually make a living. In any case, I would play the game's multiplayer, and at that time, I was hooked. There was really nothing else like it out there. Call of Duty 2 did have people still playing it, but it feels way more dated in comparison to the way this game's multiplayer was structured, not to mention all the polish applied to it. And that's the thing with Call of Duty. It was a franchise that had some fantastic campaigns, as well as some fantastic multiplayer, but like Quake, the multiplayer was always its biggest component, and it developed this incredible love and hate relationship within people that would play and sweat out the game's matches. But that's not to say that the single player wasn't as important, mind you. In fact, some of the campaigns are still fun to play through, and this game is one of them. So the plot is like one of those military-based films where it usually involves a terrorist cell or a political party with extremist-based views. And we go on a number of operations across different parts of the world. The scale of warfare and the enemies you fight are now different. It's no longer like it was in the previous COD games where you had a black and white setting, Axis and allies, but rather a more complicated mess with different factions wanting different things. The story of the games were never really that interesting if I'm being honest, but what carried it were the memorable characters and the moments in the campaigns, characters like Price, Gaz, Vasquez, and Griggs, as well as the villains that had appeared in the game, on top of the missions that all had something different going for them. The missions where you play as the Marine Sergeant Jackson were some of my favorites, as well as the one on the ship, the AC-130 gunship, and of course, the Pripyat mission, which is for me, one of the best missions ever made in the whole franchise. I remembered playing through the campaign and just replaying some of the missions that I really enjoyed, or giving veteran difficulty a crack, which mind you was really hard. Very fast time to kill and the never-ending feeling that the enemies just won't stop coming. And also, the difficulty recommendation in this game is also actually determined by how well you do in the F&G mission, where you do the training course. If you beat Infinity Ward's timer, the game actually recommends the hardest difficulty. Some of the missions themselves have some fantastic atmosphere as well, especially the Pripyat mission. The first half of it was quite scary, like the part where you have to prone and there's a whole metric ton of soldiers that appear in front of you, and you have to adjust your movement slightly. It was the first time in the series where you had missions like this, as well as another one like the AC-130, where it departed from the traditional structure of just going around shooting everyone, taking cover when you've taken too much damage, healing, and then getting back at it again. To elaborate more on the story itself, well, there's a civil war between two parties in Russia, the current ruling party in the game that rules, and the ultranationalists, the main enemies that you fight in this game. Other than that, you also have the Op4 faction, where its leader seizes power in the Middle East and kills their president. As a result, the Americans would then decide to invade in retaliation, and the SAS forces would go after the ultranationalist groups. In the SAS, you have SOAP.
Right. What the hell kind of name is SOAP, eh?
In the US Marines, you have Sergeant Jackson. These characters were blank slates and wouldn't really have personalities of their own. The story of COD 4 would be told through the presence of other characters. It wouldn't be until Modern Warfare 2 that they would develop Soap's character, but in this game you would never hear him talk or even see his character. The older COD games were like this too. The idea of this was mainly to allow the player to more or less play as the character, as if they were in the story. You don't really see a lot of games do this anymore, but it was normal back then. You go from one mission to the next, progressing through its story, stopping the situation from progressing any further and getting worse. On the one hand you do, and on the other, well, the game was full of memorable moments, and this was one of them. Seeing the total devastation of a nuke and knowing full well that you were pretty much fucked. And as I had already said, the missions themselves had a great deal of variety, and because of the dynamics of warfare changing through the times, the reasons that you're fighting as well are different and more complicated. In the COD game set in World War II, you are saving the world from a great evil, a black and white battle between opposing forces. In COD 4 though, you're just cleaning up a mess in a world where everything's become grey, and the good and the bad is really just a matter of perspective. It's one of those games where the story is not exactly great, but is engaging enough to keep you progressing, because of the gameplay, the characters, and the level variety that are the things that make it hold together. When you boil down to it though, the game's magic eventually points to the multiplayer, the main reason why so many people played Call of Duty 4 back then, and the reason why so many people still play Call of Duty today. The gunplay was also something that just clicked really well at the time for both the single player and the multiplayer. It wasn't fast like Quake, but it wasn't slow like Halo either. Fights would end quickly, and the fast time to kill also meant that just about any weapon was useful and that each player had the same chances of killing each other in the same amount of time. It had the benefit of taking the guts of the first three games and restructuring it into a new setting that would really skyrocket the franchise to a whole new dimension. The modern weapons and the setting were a refresh that the series really needed at the time. Now, of course, they would eventually return to the World War II setting in the next installment, but it would also take the gameplay that worked so well in COD 4 and apply it there. Movement feels simple but fast and smooth. Jumping around, spraying with an SMG or using the ACOG scope with the M40, or even the broken M16 made for a lot of memorable times in the multiplayer. It's a lot more basic now compared to the later entries, but it's also more comprehensible. The game had perks that were easy to understand, one customization option for the weapon along with a few camos, as well as having only 3 kill streaks, UAV, airstrike, and helicopter. It set the template that the later entries like Modern Warfare 2 and onwards would expand on. But COD 4 had the basics down to a T, offered a multiplayer experience that was more casual but still fun enough and popular enough to make room for a competitive scene, whereas with Halo, its designs were more reminiscent of the arena shooters, like Quake and Unreal Tournament. COD 4 had something different though on the table, and the monumental success of that game would then begin the new killer phase in the FPS scene, known as Call of Duty Killers. Now again, Halo was still popular, but its eventual downfall points to this game. COD 4 was like the axe made for an execution, but Modern Warfare 2 was the executioner that struck the final blow, and after that point, Halo was pretty much finished. And it all came from Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, a game that paved the way for a whole new generation of FPS gaming, for better or worse, depending on who you ask. Now, with how much the series has changed over the years, like from the classic style of COD to the advanced movement phase of COD, to the now MW 2019 phase of COD, Call of Duty 4 in this case falls into the classic category because of how much the standards for the series has changed and how much the gameplay has been overhauled over time. But before all of that, you did still have the first 3 Call of Duty games to take into account. So in that case, Call of Duty 4 would be more like a golden age game that basically started a whole new generation of shooters, departing from Halo's template. And it would go from there all the way to Black Ops 2. Afterwards would be a dark age period going from 2013 all the way up to 2017, but with some exceptions in between like Infinite Warfare and Black Ops 3 that I thought were pretty good in my opinion. Modern Warfare 2019 though would be the modern COD as of today. It's now the new standard in the series and it's overhauled the gameplay. That's very different from what came before. What was modern before had now become a classic in its own right and is a golden standard for how to make a simple but classic fun shooter. A lot of long-time Call of Duty players like me, Call of Duty 4 was really the game that made the franchise pop off in a way that the classic COD games couldn't really do at the time. I refer to Call of Duty 4 as the start of the golden age because everything from there up until 2012 had fantastic campaigns, side content like the Zombies mode, Modern Warfare 2 Spec Ops, as well as the improvements made in the multiplayer department with each installment. The game is simply iconic, with so many memorable sequences and moments that I could ramble on about it all for hours, and reminisce of my time spent in both the campaigns and the multiplayer. But at the end of the day, it's just one of my more nostalgic games, from a time capsule when multiplayer was a lot more simpler and in some ways a lot more fun. Now, Call of Duty is still popular, but I wouldn't really say it's the king anymore. In fact, I think we're beyond that mentality nowadays because there are so many types of shooters that each respective subgenre has their own best games and worst games. The franchise is just simply one of the popular ones currently, alongside Counter-Strike, Valorant, Apex, Team Fortress 2, Fortnite, and a few others to boot. In both single player and multiplayer, the variety is now vast. Gone are the days of Halo or Call of Duty Killers being the dominant formula. Call of Duty 4 was a genesis point of that period, where it would move on from the Halo phase and go into the Call of Duty phase, and Call of Duty as a result took over for a very long time in the mainstream FPS scene. In retrospect, the game is still awesome, but like I said, it still feels somewhat basic compared to what other shooters offer today, not to mention the later CODs. However, the game actually still has active players. Not a huge amount, but still enough to get into team deathmatch sessions or even free-for-alls. Not to mention that on the PC, you even have mods for the game. The most memorable one that I can think of is Star Wars Galactic Warfare, where it was quite literally COD 4 but with a Star Wars skin, featuring the same weapons and iconic locations from the movies. Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare was and still is a golden age COD game, and a modern classic in my book. Thank you for watching.
Do it.
Clear! Clear! Route clear! He's not here. It's on a loop. Broadcast is recorded.
Yeah. Score 1 for military intelligence.
Griggs, turn that off.
Roger that. I got something better anyway.
Man, this is Red Dot. TV station secure. No sign of Al-Assad. The broadcast is a recording. Over.
Hey, yo,
Yeah.
big word
Hoorah.
Roger that, command. Out. Marines, rally up. We got a new assignment. Take your gear and get ready to move out. Let's go.
What's good? Exciting, unorthodox.